The stars were alive, but not with the light of hope. They were the cold pinpricks of a galaxy that had long since given up on its inhabitants. In the heart of Zharin Dominion space, the human spirit glided silently through the abyss, its sleek hull cutting a path through the starlit void like a razor through flesh. Captain Elysia Harper stood on the bridge, staring at the screen in front of her, her fingers hovering over the controls. The galaxy was not kind to humans. She knew that. The Zharin Dominion had swept through humanity's colonies with the precision of a predator, and the once bustling worlds were now nothing more than graveyards, their inhabitants wiped out or enslaved. The ship's engines hummed softly, vibrating through her bones. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense. Every crew member moved with quiet precision, their eyes fixed on their stations, waiting for the storm to break. Alicia's eyes narrowed. She had known this moment would come. They had been drifting for days, deep into the enemy's territory, waiting for the Zharin to notice them. And now, at last, the inevitable had arrived. "Report," she barked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Her first officer, Lieutenant Rix, turned to her, his face pale. "Captain, we've been detected," he said, his voice tight. "They're mobilizing." Alicia's jaw clenched. The Zharin Dominion's fleet was vast, too vast. If they caught them, they'd be nothing but another casualty in the endless war. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "How long before they're in range?" she asked. Rix's fingers danced over his console, his brow furrowing in concentration. 5 minutes, Captain. The fleet is massive, and it's closing in fast. We won't outrun them." Alicia's mind raced. There was no time to wait for backup. This was it. The only chance she and her crew had was to fight. "Set the course for the nebula," she ordered. "We'll use it for cover." The crews shifted into action, working in synchronized chaos. The human spirit veered left, plunging into the dense cloud of gas and dust that had once been a sanctuary for the rebel fleet. The nebula, though beautiful in its swirling mass of purple and blue, offered little protection against the Zharin's relentless pursuit. But it was all they had. Elysia paced in front of the observation window, watching the colorful blur of the nebula streak by. She could almost hear the Zharin fleet's engines, even though they were still far away. She knew they wouldn't stop. The Zharin never stopped. But neither would she. "Prepare the weapons," she commanded, her voice steady. The crew members on the bridge didn't hesitate. They knew the stakes. The weapons systems of the human spirit were advanced, but even they were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the Zharin fleet. They would have to use their wits to survive this. She turned to Rix, who was still monitoring the Zharin ships on his screen. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Captain," he said, his voice laced with doubt, "they're not just here for us. They're here to make an example. If we engage, they'll wipe us out in seconds." Elysia didn't flinch. "I didn't come this far to run," she said coldly. "We fight." Rix swallowed hard. "Understood, Captain." The tension on the bridge grew thicker, every heartbeat an eternity, as the human spirit plunged deeper into the nebula. The swirling clouds of gas and dust became denser, the view outside the observation window nothing more than a haze of muted colors. Elysia could feel the weight of every decision pressing on her chest. One wrong move, and it would all be over. A sudden alert rang out, slicing through the silence. "Captain, the Zharin fleet is entering the nebula," Rix said. "They've activated their advanced scanners." Alicia's mind raced. She had hoped the nebula would provide some cover, but she hadn't counted on the Zharin's sophisticated technology. They'd be able to see right through the clouds. "We need to move now," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She glanced at the screen showing the enemy fleet. It was too big. Too many. Her fingers hovered over the control panel, hesitation flooding her veins. "All hands brace for impact," she ordered. The ship shuddered as the first volley of Zharin fire slammed into their shields. Sparks flew from consoles, and the ship's artificial gravity flickered briefly before stabilizing. The human spirit lurched forward, barely staying in control. Shields holding at 50%. Lieutenant Jorel, the weapons officer, shouted from his station. Elysia gritted her teeth. Target their lead ship, she commanded. Let's see how they like a taste of human firepower. Jorel's hands flew over the weapons console, and the human spirit's cannons roared to life. Brilliant blasts of energy shot through the nebula, striking the lead Zharin warship dead center. The ship's shields flared brightly as the blast made contact, but it held. Direct hit, Captain, Jorel said, his voice almost too calm. Shields still holding. They've returned fire. Another wave of Zharin blasts hit their ship, shaking the entire vessel. Alicia's grip tightened on the command chair as the ship rattled under the assault. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, she shouted. We can't take another hit like that. The ship's engine screamed in protest as it shifted course again, narrowly dodging the next wave of fire. The human spirit was fast, but the Zharin fleet was relentless, always one step behind. Elysia knew they couldn't keep this up for long. They needed an edge. The ship rocked again, but this time, the attack didn't come from the Zharin. Alicia's heart skipped a beat as the warning lights blinked across the bridge. The scanners showed another ship, a human warship, appearing from the shadows of the nebula. It was smaller than the human spirit, but it moved with the deadly grace of a predator. And it was unmistakably human. That's impossible, Elysia muttered, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of it. How are they here? Rix's voice trembled as he spoke. Captain, it's the Dawn's Edge. They made it. Alicia's pulse quickened. The Dawn's Edge was supposed to have been lost in the last battle. Its appearance now, in the heart of enemy territory, could mean only one thing: they had a chance. The human fleet had arrived. Signal them, she ordered, her voice rising with new hope. Tell them to focus on the Zharin flagship. We're not alone anymore. As the Dawn's Edge unleashed a barrage of fire on the Zharin flagship, Elysia allowed herself a brief, fleeting moment of hope. They had a fighting chance now. But the war was far from over. This was only the beginning. And for humanity, that was enough. The battle was not yet over. The human spirit limped through the debris-strewn nebula, its hull scarred and burned from the relentless Zharin assault. The shields were down to a precarious 10%, and every crew member was on edge, their faces pale with exhaustion. The Dawn's Edge had joined the fight, but even with their help, it wasn't enough to stop the overwhelming power of the Zharin fleet. Captain Elysia Harper stood at the center of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the flickering display showing the remnants of the Zharin flagship. It was barely visible through the haze of smoke and fire, but it was still moving, still a threat. A firestorm of debris floated in space, remnants of the deadly exchange. Damage report, she commanded, her voice steady but strained. Structural integrity at 70%, Lieutenant Rix replied, his voice tight with tension. We've lost auxiliary power to 3 sectors, including the engine room. And we've got multiple hull breaches, Captain. Casualties? Elysia asked, her voice a little more forceful than usual. 3 confirmed dead, Rix said quietly, and at least 10 more injured. Elysia closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking in the weight of the loss. Every death was a blow to her soul, every injury a reminder of the heavy responsibility she carried. But she couldn't let it consume her. Not yet. We need to get to the safe zone, she said, her voice carrying the harsh edge of command. Get us out of here, now. We're losing power to the FTL engines, Rix replied. It's not going to be that simple, Captain. Elysia turned toward him, her face hardening. Then fix it. She was used to pressure. She had been through worse. But nothing felt worse than seeing her crew battered and broken, knowing the cost of their fight. The Zharin were relentless, and the odds were slipping away like sand through her fingers. The ship trembled again, a violent shake that rattled the crew members, sending one of the bridge consoles sparking. Elysia gritted her teeth. They weren't alone. The Zharin were closing in. Enemy fleet still on our tail, Lieutenant Jorel reported from the weapons station. They're not letting up. How much longer before they catch up? Elysia asked, turning to face him. They're using their advanced tracking systems, Jorel said, his voice filled with grim certainty. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they'll be in range to engage us again. The reality of it hit her like a cold slap. They were running out of time. The human spirit was no longer a threat to the Zharin. It was a dying ship, struggling to stay ahead of its pursuers. Get me a line to the Dawn's Edge, Elysia ordered. She couldn't rely on the human spirit to survive this alone. Her eyes met Rix's, and she knew what he was thinking. The same thing had crossed her mind 1,000 times. Rix nodded, then turned back to his station, inputting commands. A tense silence filled the bridge as the communication line buzzed to life. Captain, you're live? Dawn's Edge, this is Captain Harper of the Human Spirit. We need to fall back to the nearest jump point, or we're done, Elysia said, keeping her voice steady. Do you copy? For a moment, there was only static. Then, a familiar voice crackled through. Human Spirit, this is Captain Alara Koss of the Dawn's Edge. We're in the same position as you. The Zharin are already on us, and we can't outrun them. We need a plan. Alicia's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. I know, she said. But we don't have the luxury of time. You need to draw their fire. We'll make a break for the jump point. It's the only way. There was a long pause before Koss replied. Understood. We're with you, Captain. Let's make this count. Elysia exhaled sharply. At least she wasn't alone in this. But there was still a long, dangerous road ahead. She glanced at the tactical map in front of her, watching the Zharin ships getting closer. The jump point was their only chance, if they could make it. Rix, Elysia said, how much time until those engines are back online? Not enough, he replied, a trace of frustration in his voice. The FTL system is shot. If we don't get auxiliary power back in the next minute, we're not going anywhere. Alicia's eyes flicked to the display of their location, the stars swirling around them. It would be close. The Zharin fleet was closing the gap fast, and with each passing second, the situation grew more dire. If they couldn't jump, they would be sitting ducks in deep space. Her mind raced. A cold thought crept into her mind. Maybe this is it. She pushed it aside immediately. They had a chance, no matter how slim. Jorel, prepare to fire on any Zharin ships that break through the nebula's edge, Elysia ordered. We're not going down without a fight. Jorel's face hardened as he acknowledged the command. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship's strained systems. The crew waited, knowing they were on borrowed time. The human spirit was not a warship, it was a symbol. A symbol of humanity's refusal to go quietly into the dark. The countdown to the Zharin's next wave began. Ready to fire, Captain, Jorel said, his voice steady, but there was a glimmer of fear in his eyes. Even he knew that this battle was unwinnable. Elysia held her breath. The tension was unbearable. No, she whispered. Jorel didn't hesitate. He fired. Bright, searing beams of energy shot from the human spirit, breaking through the mist of the nebula and slamming into the approaching Zharin ships. For a moment, it felt like the universe held its breath. The Zharin retaliated, firing back with devastating precision. The ship lurched under the assault, but they had bought themselves a moment. We're through the nebula! Rick shouted, his voice filled with relief. Elysia didn't allow herself to relax, not yet. The jump point was still too far away. The human spirit was barely holding together, and the Zharin had just made it clear that they wouldn't let the humans escape. We need those engines, she said, her voice colder than ice. Rix worked feverishly, his fingers flying over the console. Captain, we're losing power in the engine room. The human spirit began to drift, its engines sputtering as the Zharin fleet continued to close in. Do we have a chance? Elysia asked, her voice thick with frustration. Rix didn't respond immediately. His fingers hovered over the controls for a moment before he looked up at Elysia, his face pale. It's gonna be close. We need a miracle. Elysia clenched her fists. She wasn't about to wait for a miracle. Prepare for a last-ditch maneuver, she said, her voice a razor-sharp command. We're making our own miracle. The human spirit hung in space like a wounded animal, battered and broken, its systems flickering in and out of life. Captain Elysia Harper stood at the heart of the bridge, her eyes locked on the viewscreen, watching the distant stars. The Zharin fleet had pressed them into the very edge of the nebula, and their chances of escaping had been slim from the start. Now they were almost gone. The emergency lights cast a red glow over the room, casting sharp shadows across the faces of her crew. Each of them was exhausted, physically, mentally, spiritually. The hum of the ship's failing systems filled the silence like a ticking clock. We've got 20 minutes until the Zharin make contact again, Rix reported, his voice calm, but his eyes betraying the desperation he felt. The jump point is still too far. We won't make it without power. Elysia clenched her jaw. We don't have 20 minutes. We need to act now. The control panel in front of her flickered as she punched in the coordinates for the jump point again. The human spirit was slowly bleeding out, its engines barely holding together. Every passing second felt like an eternity. They had one shot at survival, and it was slipping through her fingers. We can't outrun them. Lieutenant Jorel spoke from the weapons station, his voice strained. Not with what we've got left. The Zharin will catch us before we even get close. She turned toward him, locking eyes with her weapons officer. Jorel's usual confidence was gone. Then we fight, she said, her tone colder than ever. We make them bleed. Elysia turned back to the viewscreen, watching as the stars seemed to stretch and blur. The human spirit was at the edge of the nebula now, the cold void of open space yawning before them. And just beyond that, the Zharin fleet was closing in, their ships like shadows in the distance. We've got one chance to stop them, she said, more to herself than to the crew. We need to take out the Zharin flagship. If we do that, we might just have a shot at getting out of here. Rix's face turned ashen. The flagship? Captain, that's suicide. We're already operating at less than half our capacity. We don't have the firepower. I didn't come this far to back down, she snapped, her voice hard. I'll take full responsibility. We're going after that ship. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but he didn't argue. They knew what was at stake. The human spirit had been humanity's last hope in the war against the Zharin. If they didn't fight now, all of their sacrifices, all of the bloodshed, would be for nothing. Prepare the weapons, Elysia ordered. The crew immediately jumped into action. Jorel's fingers flew over the console, adjusting the targeting systems as they worked to get a lock on the Zharin flagship. The ship shuddered under another blast, but the shields held, barely. We're still taking hits, Rix said, his voice tinged with frustration. We can't keep taking this kind of fire. The hull is already compromised. Elysia didn't take her eyes off the screen. We're going to make this count, she said, more to herself than anyone else. It's now or never. The Zharin flagship appeared on their scanners, a massive, imposing ship gliding effortlessly through space. Its weapon systems were already charging, ready to unleash a deadly barrage. Elysia could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They were close, too close. Full throttle, she commanded. Straight at them. The human spirit lurched forward, its engines screaming in protest as they pushed the ship to its limit. The crew's grips tightened on their stations, and the ship's hull groaned under the strain. Shields are holding, Jorel reported. We'll need a direct hit to do any real damage. We need to get close. Alicia's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the command chair. She didn't flinch as another blast from the Zharin flagship struck them, rocking the ship. She couldn't afford to feel fear. Not now. Target the flagship's engines, she ordered. Take out their propulsion. If they can't move, they can't catch us. Jorel's hands moved quickly, the weapons systems locking onto the target. Firing in 5, 4, 3. The human spirit's weapons fired, and the entire ship trembled as the cannons unleashed a volley of energy blasts. For a brief moment, it felt like time stopped. The light from the explosions filled the viewscreen, blinding them to everything else. Then the darkness returned, and the Zharin flagship was still there. The shields flared, absorbing the blast, but the ship hadn't been destroyed. "They've activated their countermeasures," Jor-El shouted. "We didn't do enough damage. The shields are still intact." Elysia cursed under her breath. The Zharin were just too powerful. The flagship wasn't going to fall easily. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "We can't take another hit like that." The human spirit jerked violently as it changed course, dodging another round of fire from the flagship. The ship was dying, and they had no way of knowing how long it would hold up. Each blast from the Zharin sent a ripple of dread through Alicia's chest. "Rix!" she shouted. "We need more time. What's our status on the FTL drive?" His hands moved across the console, desperation creeping into his voice. "It's not going to work, Captain. The damage is too severe. We need at least an hour to get the drive back online, and we don't have that long." Alicia's eyes narrowed as she stared at the flagship. They didn't have an hour. They barely had minutes. "Then we fight," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "We'll take them down, piece by piece. Jor-El, fire again. Target their weapon systems." The crew moved with mechanical precision, their fear replaced by the raw energy of survival. The ship jolted as another barrage of fire erupted from the human spirit's cannons. This time, the flagship's weapons systems flared, and one of the Zharin's weapon turrets exploded in a cascade of sparks. Alicia's heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was a victory. A small one. "Keep firing, Jor-El," she ordered. "We'll make this count." Just as the human spirit fired again, the view screen flashed with the image of an incoming Zharin ship, a second wave. The enemy was not giving up. And neither would she. The final moments of this battle would define everything. It would be her crew's legacy. "We're not finished yet," Elysia said through gritted teeth, her eyes locked on the ship's dwindling shields. "This war is ours to win." And, for better or worse, she would lead them to the end. The human spirit groaned under the strain as it fought against the final wave of the Zharin fleet. Elysia Harper stood tall in the center of the bridge, her eyes locked on the view screen, heart hammering in her chest. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the ship's remaining systems a constant reminder of how fragile their existence had become. "We're running out of time, Captain," Rick said, his voice tight with urgency. "The Zharin flagship is coming in fast. It's nearly on top of us." Elysia didn't look away from the screen. The Zharin flagship loomed closer with every passing second, its weapons primed to obliterate them. The human spirit had been pushed to the absolute edge, but it wasn't done yet. Neither was she. "Can we make the jump?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. Their FTL drive was still offline, and the Zharin fleet was closing in faster than they could prepare. She knew the answer. They couldn't. "No, Captain," Rix answered, his voice somber. "We won't make it. Not with the damage we've sustained." A cold silence fell over the bridge. Alicia's mind raced. There was no escape. The Zharin would destroy them if they didn't act, but they had no more time. Elysia turned toward Jor-El, who was working feverishly at the weapons console. "Jor-El, fire everything we've got. We're going down swinging." Jor-El didn't hesitate. His hands moved over the controls with practiced precision, and the ship's weapons fired in a blinding flare of energy. The blast hit the Zharin flagship's shield with force, but it didn't penetrate. It only slowed the inevitable. Another wave of fire from the Zharin flagship struck them, shaking the ship violently. Sparks flew from consoles, and the ship shuddered as alarms blared throughout the bridge. Alicia's grip tightened on the edge of her chair, but she didn't flinch. "Shields down to 5%, Jor-El shouted, his voice strained. "We can't take much more of this." "I know," Elysia said, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. She turned to Rix. "We're going to make one final push. Set the course for the Zharin's central core." Rix's eyes widened. Captain, that's suicide! The core is heavily fortified. We don't have the power to break through. I know, she said again, her voice low. But it's our only shot. If we can take out their core, we might cripple their fleet long enough for the Dawn's Edge to get away. It's the only chance we've got. Rix stared at her for a long moment, his face pale but resolute. Understood, Captain? Setting course for the central core. The ship lurched as Rix initiated the maneuver, the human spirit flying straight toward the heart of the Zharin fleet. The ship groaned under the pressure, but Elysia's eyes never left the screen. There was no turning back now. They were going to make sure humanity's last stand counted for something. We're in range, Joro called out, his voice filled with urgency. Firing now! The ship's weapons fired once more, this time with everything they had left. The energy blast slammed into the Zharin flagship, the explosion lighting up the blackness of space. The flagship's shields flickered, then faltered. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. They'd done it. For one brief, glorious moment, the Zharin flagship staggered, its weapons failing. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it was enough to send a ripple of panic through their ranks. The rest of the Zharin fleet slowed, trying to recalibrate in response to the sudden disruption. Now! Elysia shouted. Rix turned the ship sharply, angling the human spirit toward the heart of the Zharin fleet. They were close now, so close she could almost taste victory. She watched as the last of their shields flickered out, leaving them completely vulnerable. The Zharin flagship regained power, but it was too late. Joro fired again. The energy blast hit the flagship's central core directly. Time seemed to freeze. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very fabric of space itself, the flagship exploded in a cataclysmic burst of energy. The force of the explosion sent shockwaves rippling through the surrounding ships, causing several of the Zharin vessels to detonate in a chain reaction. The bridge of the human spirit was thrown into chaos. Sparks flew from the ceiling, and the ship shuddered violently, its systems screaming as it struggled to stay intact. We're losing power! Rix shouted. Hull integrity failing! Elysia felt the ship's tremors deep in her bones. The human spirit was dying. But they had done it. They had crippled the Zharin fleet. And in that final act of defiance, they had bought time. Prepare for emergency evacuation, she ordered, her voice barely audible over the ship's groaning systems. Get to the escape pods. She turned to her crew. Joro, Rix, and the others were already moving, gathering their gear and preparing to abandon the ship. The mission was over, but their survival was not guaranteed. The human spirit had done its job. The Zharin flagship was gone, and with it, their iron grip on the galaxy had weakened. Elysia made her way to the escape pod bay, her thoughts racing. The Zharin were still out there, still a threat to humanity's scattered colonies. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She stepped into the escape pod, taking one last look at the burning remains of the human spirit as it drifted into oblivion. The explosion of the flagship still burned in her mind. It had been a victory. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the pod's hatch closed and the capsule ejected into the cold void of space, Elysia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The fight was far from finished, but humanity had proven something. They weren't just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. The stars stretched out before her, and for the first time in a long while, Elysia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better. They would rebuild. They would fight on. And when the day came, humanity would stand tall once again,